Hello and Happy New Year to all of you out there. It is now 2018. We are inexorably marching towards our inevitable death, and we're all getting old. I haven't made a little video in a while because I was on holiday and it was awesome. I was eating so much meat and drinking so much wine. It made me reconsider my life. Maybe I should make videos about that and eat and drink to an early but very happy grave. But until then, this is the first episode of the year, and it is also the episode in which I'm going to talk about my 10 favorite films of 2017. I didn't make a worst list. I've gotten pretty good at avoiding films that I know I'm gonna hate, and at this point in time, I just don't see films that I know are gonna be really bad. So in general, films that I don't like are films that I have an interest in seeing and ultimately end up being very disappointed in. But for those interested, maybe the worst film I saw all year was King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, directed by Guy Ritchie. I saw this on a plane. Had no real interest in seeing it, but I don't know, there was a bunch of turbulence, and I wanted something to take my mind off my mortality, I guess, so I watched Guy Ritchie's new film, and I thought it was a giant piece of crap. Horrible in terms of direction and acting. David Beckham's scene is especially in the film maybe one of the worst scenes of 2017, if not in all of film history, and Charlie Hunnam, after The Lost City of Z, made me actually believe that he could act. I have now rescinded that belief after having watched King Arthur, Legend of the Sword. And as far as the most disappointing film that I've seen all year, that is a title that is easily given to Baby Driver, which I still think is a really bad film, but I had high hopes for it. I mean, it's an Edgar Wright film, whom I hold in high regard because of his first two films especially. And I talked about it at length. It was actually the first thing I did on this channel. It was audio only, but I spent a good 15 minutes explaining why I thought that movie was awful. And probably the entirety of the internet disagrees with me, but, if you're curious, I'll leave a link right up there if you want to check it out. And without further ado, let's just move on to the top 10 films of 2017. I intentionally kept it down to 10 films because it's more fun to restrict yourself. I could have easily done a top 20, but restricting yourself is actually more fun. And when it comes down to it, down the line, when I'm going to think about 2017, these are the films that I'm going to think about. And these are the films that I'm going to remember. And let's just really quickly get into it. Number 10 is a film called Menashe, and it is directed by Joshua Z. Weinstein. I don't know if he has any sort of affiliation with one Mr. Harvey Weinstein, but Menashe was a film that was kind of totally off my radar. I remember it came out during Fantasia, which is not a good time for me to see anything other than Fantasia films. Menashe takes place in a Hasidic Jewish community, an Orthodox Jewish community in Brooklyn, and Menashe is this grocery store clerk who just lost his wife. And apparently it is the tradition in Orthodox Judaism that a child can only be raised by a biparental family. So as a single father, he cannot properly take care of his son, and his son is put in the custody of his brother-in-law, whom he really doesn't have a very good relationship with. And the entirety of the film is about sort of him trying to reconcile his tradition with also his desire to raise his son. And that sort of very difficult reconciliation within tradition versus desire is something that's really quite remarkable throughout the film. And the film never goes towards the easy direction of just saying, oh, well, religion is stupid, or give up your faith or whatever, because life's way more complicated than that, and you just can't run away from your community or whatever, or nor maybe should he. That's not really what's in question. He's not necessarily a great father either. I mean, you see him, he's kind of irresponsible. There's this really funny line within the film that one of the girls that he's on a date with, because everybody's trying to get him to date, to remarry so he can have his child, and he's not really into the idea of getting remarried right now. But one of the women who he is on a date with tells him that basically Jewish men are useless because their mother does everything for them and then their wife takes over. And it kind of shows he's kind of useless in that way, but he's a good-natured person just trying to get by, and again, trying to reconcile faith and raising his son. And it really does have this beautiful scene within the middle of the film where, you know, since he's basically a working class dude and he works for a Jewish kosher grocery store or whatever, but a lot of the other employees are Hispanic, and there's this really nice scene where they just have a beer together and sort of recognize their similarities, because in essence, because of their social status, they're in very similar situations, but also that there is a sort of distance because of cultural differences that are never going to be reconciled. But it's just a really nice scene, and this whole movie is just a wonderful, very touching, very beautiful look into a community. I also have to say that because I live in a very Orthodox Jewish neighborhood, it sort of fascinated me in that way, because here are these people that live alongside me. They're just across the street everywhere, that I don't really have any interactions with, that I don't really know any of them. And it sort of really is a testament to the power of cinema, that it can immerse you in this community that you really have no affiliation with, that you know nothing about, but you can really sort of, for that 1 hour and 25 minutes or whatever, have a basic understanding of who they are. And in the way that Roger Ebert used to say of film being a giant empathy machine. And I think this film really proves it, and it's a really wonderful film. And I gotta say props to A24 for releasing a film that is 95% in Hebrew. I mean, there basically is just that one scene between Menashe and the other Hispanic guys that's in English, but the entirety of the film's in Hebrew. And I urge you guys to check it out. Number 9 is Raw, directed by Julia Ducournau. Just a wonderful, original, fucked up film in which a coming-of-age film about a young girl transitioning into a woman, a tale of sexual awakening, is transposed into a weird cannibal story about this vegetarian girl who goes to vet school. And in one of the hazing rituals, she is forced to eat raw rabbit kidney, and she starts developing a taste for meat, a taste for blood, and starts trying to eat people. And it's sort of this family curse, and it's just a really creative, original, creepy, fucked up horror film that I thought just made me really happy to see a good French genre film. We need more of those. And there are a couple, and in terms of filmmaking, there are a couple really just nice shots. You can tell that they didn't have all that much money because it's very much almost a single location film. They use that rooftop in the school really well. They use the corridors and the location that they have. They actually shoot it really well, and even towards the beginning of the film, there's like a one-shot take of a party that's insane with tons of extras. And I rag a lot about single take long shots a lot because, you know, I find generally they're there to show off, but in this case it really demonstrated a state of mind and a sense of the overwhelming feeling that this girl is going through. And yeah, Raw, I mean, it's been talked about a lot. Kermode put it number 1 on his best films of the year. And it also just reminds me of what it was like to go to university in France. I wasn't in vet school. For me, it was medicine, but a lot of similar things, and also a lot of things that resembled, you know, stories that are passed down to you from older generations. And certainly, I do not miss that context in the slightest. Number 8 is Ryan Prows's feature film debut, Lowlife, which had its world premiere at Fantasia, and since, I like to feel important, I was at that world premiere. It gives me meaning in this life that I saw something before other people. But seriously though, it is an incredible feature film debut. I am absolutely certain that the film will do really well when it's released in March, I think. IFC Midnight picked it up and will be giving it a release. I'm sure that it has all the hallmarks of a cult film. And I'm certain that we're going to be hearing about this Ryan Prowse character in the future. The film, I talked about it on the Fantasia Film Festival Review Episode 2. It's very much structured like Pulp Fiction, but in a way that's not annoying. I mean, there are so many really bad Pulp Fiction knockoffs out there, especially in the 90s. There were like a plethora of them, and they were all garbage. The film is incredibly well written. Some of the dialogue's really funny, and more than any other film that I saw this year, the way it manages to shift tones and shift genres, going from comedy to gore to action to drama to crime film, it does that so beautifully, and it flows in that way so effortlessly. I just haven't seen anything quite like it this year and in a very long time. Sometimes those tone shifts can be really jarring, and it takes a really talented writer and a really talented director to pull it off, and I'm very certain that the director of Lowlife, Ryan Prowse, is one for the future. Number 7 is Denis Villeneuve's Blade Runner 2049. I gave this film a pretty glowing review back in October. And I kind of stand by it. Almost amazed they made a good Blade Runner sequel. Like, I still can't grasp my head around the fact that we have a really good Blade Runner sequel. I don't know how that's possible. The film, unfortunately, didn't do all that well. But I think they overestimated how many people actually give a shit about Blade Runner. I mean, there's a very vocal minority of people on the internet that love that film to death, but the film didn't do well when it came out in 1982, and it really didn't set the world on fire this time around. But other than that, what can I say about Blade Runner 2049? It hasn't been said, not much really. It's gorgeous to look at. It is almost a Tarkovsky movie with a $150 million budget, which is something that I never thought I would ever see in my life. And more than that, it's a Denis Villeneuve film that I really love, which I really haven't been a fan of this director previously. I've actually disliked a lot of his films, and he just completely won me over, and I'm all in for Dune. Number 6 is Paterson, directed by Jim Jarmusch. I haven't talked about this film. It came out really early this year for us. For very select few, it was released at the end of 2016, but for us up north, it was, at least in Montreal, it was a 2017 release. And it is just a beautiful, beautiful film that stayed with me throughout the year about the just beauty in the mundane and the poetry of everyday life. Adam Driver is incredible in the film. It's a film that nothing happens. And to describe it is just, well, there's this guy, he drives a bus and he writes poetry, and that's the entirety of the film. The film is almost, in its beauty and its simplicity, almost like a Japanese film. Like it felt like something Koreeda would make, or something that, lifted heavily from Ozu or something, and it's just a marvelous piece of filmmaking. And with Jarmusch in general, I'm sort of 50-50. He's very hit or miss for me. There are films of his that I love, like Ghost Dog, like Paterson, Only Lovers Left Alive, and there are films that I really don't care for at all. Limits of Control, Dead Man, which I know is a very popular film for some reason, but I really hated Dead Man. So this one for me, he really knocked it out of the park, and I love this film to bits. Number 5, which really should be number 1 because as it proclaims itself, it is the best of the best movie, is Bad Black, directed by Nabwana IGG, a director from Uganda, and produces action films with more heart and soul and joy and fun than anything Marvel or DC or Disney or any big franchise studio has ever put out in the last 10 years. It's hard to argue for Bad Black is a great film on a technical standpoint. It's made with a camera that probably doesn't even shoot HD. The guy edits his film on a computer that he basically made himself from recycled parts that he found. He doesn't have enough storage space to actually preserve his films, so he just keeps them on DVD. And every time he makes a new film, he erases everything that he had before and starts over. The beauty in the films of this director are not in what you would associate traditionally with what a great film is. They are in the absolute joy of filmmaking. Again, he makes films with absolutely no resources, and yet he is able to put out films that are fun, they're entertaining, they are funny, they're smart. I mean, they are more self-aware than anything you will see this year. Like, any of the limitations and this sort of ridiculousness that you see on screen, the film is completely aware of them. It's almost like witnessing the rebirth of cinema in a way, because since these guys don't have access to film school, to a film industry, to anything really resembling film courses or university, they're basically inventing things on the spot and throwing stuff at the wall, seeing what sticks, in sort of accordance with their taste in films, which seem to be American action films from the 80s. And it's really incredibly beautiful to see a community really come together and make films together. And as somebody who's from a first world country who has all the tools and the technology at his disposal to make films, it really is just a kick up the ass, a realization that, man, these guys, they make films with nothing, and we have everything, and we are useless. So it really is an amazing film, both for the context in which it's made, both because of the place in which it's made, but also just it's funny as fuck. I mean, I urge everybody to check these films out. I Hate Everything made a review of his previous film called Who Killed Captain Alex, and it was in his search for the worst portion, and I was really afraid that he kind of didn't get why this film was so important and was gonna bash it for its shoddy technical aspects, but actually I was so happy because throughout the video he just says, okay, yeah, this film, there's not a lot of money behind it, but then he goes on to make like a 30-minute review on why this film is amazing and why it's great and why it's one of the funnest films he's seen in a long time. And I'm gonna leave a link in the description to his review if you haven't seen it, because I think it's fully worth it, and it is a wonderful breakdown of just an amazing and very exuberant filmmaker. I was lucky enough to see the film at Fantasia as well, so we saw it on a big screen with an audience just having the time of their lives, and then after that there's a live Skype session with the director in Uganda, so it was just, on top of being a great film, it was a great experience. And yeah, check out this guy's film, check out Who Killed Captain Alex, check out Bad Black. You'll really have a blast. Number 4 is Barbara by Mathieu Amalric. Again, I have a sort of more detailed review, which I'll put right up here as to what I loved about this film. I think it's an incredible study of an actor, of an actress. It's an incredible sort of experiment with the form of the biopic. And it's just a really beautiful film about an iconic character. And I'm not going to say more. My thoughts on it are pretty well documented. It's a beautiful film, and it's number 4 on my list. Alright, so number 3 is The Salesman by Asghar Farhadi, an Iranian director, and it is an Iranian film. The basic story is that this couple, they are artists, and they're actors actually, they are theater actors, and they move to a new apartment, and one night when the husband's away, the wife is assaulted and raped, and the rest of the film is spent with the husband trying to find the person who raped his wife. And sort of the brilliance of the film is in the reasons behind why this man wants to enact revenge. He is so obsessed with sort of getting revenge and sort of getting reparation for what happened to him. You know, he's not even thinking about his wife so much. He's thinking really about how this affects him and how it sort of almost degraded his property in a way, instead of actually being there for his wife and caring about, you know, this person that he supposedly loved. And instead he's going totally in the opposite direction and obsessing about the person that hurt her, but through her actually hurt him, and totally ignoring somebody who needs him at a very vulnerable moment in her life. And the writing and the acting in the film is just stellar. And Asghar Farhadi, who got a lot of praise back in 2011, I believe, when he did A Separation, has stepped it up a notch even, in my opinion. And I'm really, really curious to see what he does next. He's a really creative, interesting filmmaker, and I think he's like truly a great screenwriter. I mean, he's a good director, but he's a great screenwriter. So number 2 is The Lost City of Z, directed by James Gray. You know, in a normal world, this film would be sweeping up Oscar nominations and award nominations left and right, and it would have done, you know, good business, and it would have been one of those films that is pushed in November and December for awards considerations, and it would have a very good shot at, you know, walking away with a lot. It's like a classic Hollywood film that they used to make in the 60s and 70s that they don't make anymore. Except we live in a weird world where that is not the norm, and so this film is an anomaly. And not only that, but it didn't do very well, despite the fact that it had Robert Pattinson and Charlie Hunnam, and it had some pretty big names. And they are amazing in the film. I mean, I shat on him for King Arthur, and from what I've seen of Sons of Anarchy, I never thought he was a really good director. In Pacific Rim, I think he's the weakest part of the film. But in this, he actually convinced me that he could act, and that's just James Gray working his magic. Robert Pattinson's amazing in the film, and he's having a really, really good year. The film is absolutely gorgeous. It taps into these wonderful aesthetics that I love, and is reminiscent of films that are really near and dear to my heart, like something like Edgar, The Wrath of God. You know, anytime a film takes place in the rainforest, I start thinking Herzog, because he really is one of my favorite directors of all time. But wow, that last scene is just absolutely gorgeous. I mean, Darius Khanji shoots the shit out of this film. And I don't understand why James Gray isn't considered one of the best American directors working today, because he certainly is. And finally, the number 1 film, my favorite film of 2017, is a film that I talked about on video already, and it is Joshua and Benny Safdie's Good Time. My thoughts on the film are, again, very well documented, so I recommend you check that video and check out that review if you're curious. But it is both gorgeous and extremely well directed, incredibly acted. I mean, Pattinson, again, I mean, is in my top 2 films of the year. So the guy, he has totally won me over after me being convinced that he was not an actor, just like a pretty boy English guy for some vampire movies. No, he is a legit great actor, and he's great taste in films and great taste in directors. The film's dark, it's funny, it reeks of authenticity, which is something that I really respond to in films. I love when films really have a sense of place, where you really, from the get-go, sort of have strong character in their location, and films in which the director is really capable of placing you in a certain place, in a certain time. And this film just reeks of Queens. I mean, I've never been to Queens. I don't know much about New York, but if you were to tell me what is Queens, I would just point to that film. Like, that film feels like Queens to me. I don't know what it is. And yeah, I cannot wait to see their next film. And I should be going back and watching all their previous films, because I think these guys are so talented. So there it is. Number 1 film of the year, Good Time. And it's been a really great year overall. I saw a lot of really great movies. Now, as far as films that are sort of being mentioned in the best of films of the year categories that I've omitted, maybe I can talk about them very briefly. Dunkirk is essentially like my number 11. Again, I've spoken about that film in a review. If you're curious, you can check it out. I'm almost more of an admirer of how Nolan makes films than the films he makes, but Dunkirk is really just a really incredible cinematic experience. And again, people with $150-200 million to play around with. I wish we had more Dunkirks and more Blade Runner 2049s, and that I wish that big major studios would fund films like this and less, whatever franchise shit we're making. The Shape of Water, I almost liked it despite itself. In the first 10-15 minutes, I was very, very afraid I was going to hate it because of its aesthetic choices. I thought the music was horrible. I hate the visual style of the film. It feels like, and this is not a compliment in my book, a Jean-Pierre Jeunet film. Everything is over-mattered and precious and hyper stylized in a way that I really do not respond to. Alexandre Desplat's music, which is very like Amélie Montmartre, cliché Parisian, I absolutely hated. And as the film moved forward, because of the amazing performances, by Michael Shannon, by Sally Hawkins, because Del Toro's a really good director and knows how to tell a story, I ultimately ended up on the side of being essentially positive on the film as a whole, but aesthetically the film really grated on me. Call Me By Your Name. Call Me By Your Name it's fine. I mean, in terms of like anything positive I can say about it has already been said, so it's not really all that interesting. Yes, it's an interesting coming of age film. In terms of the relationship it explores, whatever. But there are things about it that people don't really seem to be talking about, which really bothered me. So I'm gonna get those out there as talking points. First of all, it's like a film that's tailor-made for a festival-going audience, and that's not inherently a problem, but it is very much a film that is extremely concerned about appealing to a sort of bourgeois, left-leaning, open-minded, seemingly open-minded audience. But for a film that is about sexual awakening, it's very sexless. It's almost afraid of sex. In a way, it's like almost afraid of offending sensibilities. Like, it's very delicate and romantic in a way. But it feels very artificial. Something like BPM or 120 BPM, which I covered in one of the reviews, handles sexuality in such a more graceful way. Like, the sex scenes are both raw and awkward and intimate. In a way, Robin Campillo made a film that's like unapologetically gay, documenting something that is true, whereas Call Me By Your Name is very much almost overly romanticized, and that sort of bothered me. In French, we use the term gauche caviar, which is the caviar left. Essentially, it's left-leaning people. Ideologically, they're very wealthy. And again, it's not that I have a problem with that. Is the film presents itself as like almost a fantasy of the caviar left, which is, they're very wealthy, but they're not tacky about it. They still have impeccable taste, and they don't really flaunt their wealth. They're very cultured, and in a way, they're like the embodiment of, which, ironic in a way, they're kind of the embodiment of white privilege. But the film, because it's in the 80s, has these political posters for like the Socialist Party in Italy everywhere. And for a filmmaker that you would assume, in terms of if you were to question his political ideology, would be all about, the underprivileged and the working class. The working class people in this film are treated with incredible disdain. I mean, they are literally worse than background characters. They do not have any characters. There was even a scene that really jumped out at me where the film is entirely like a close-up of Timothée Chalamet's face, and then like his maid walks in out of focus. You can't even see her face. Like, her face isn't even in the frame for that scene. And there's absolutely no reason for that scene to be entirely shot close-up of Timothée Chalamet and to totally negate any sort of character for that maid character. We know her name. Her name is Mafalda, but I don't know. It just really bothered me on the whole that a film that thinks it's very open-minded and tolerant was actually extremely, extremely bourgeois. And yeah, in terms of like gay relationships in film that came out in 2017, Call Me by Your Name is fine, but it does not hold a candle to BPM. And finally, lastly, and this is one of the big, disappointments, is Phantom Thread. I held off on doing this video because I wanted to wait for the new Paul Thomas Anderson film, because it's Paul Thomas Anderson, it's what you do. And the film really fell flat for me. It has some interesting things to say, maybe, especially if you look at it from the woman's perspective of what it's like to live and be in a relationship with somebody who's extremely creative, but at the same time is obsessed with his work, is obsessed with his creation, is extremely narcissistic and egotistical. But apart from that, it was unfortunately was kind of unappealing and uninteresting and flat, and really became fascinating when the film ends. I mean, the relationship becomes really something weird and interesting and fucked up in the last 10 minutes. And there's a great omelet scene. Like, I really wanted to eat an omelet after watching the film. But essentially, it was a huge disappointment. It's not like a bad film in any respect, of course, but I would always assume that Paul Thomas Anderson film coming out would make my top 10. I'm like the world's biggest Inherent Vice defender. I love that film to death. And no, I couldn't really get behind Phantom Thread. I'd be curious to see it again, but I'd want to see it, on film. Unfortunately, I saw a digital print. There were no 35 or 70 millimeter prints of the film in my area. And that about does it for this video. Just for everybody out there, thanks for watching. You can like and subscribe. That would be very much appreciated. And those were the top 10 films of the year. 2017 was pretty damn good if you ask me, and I'm looking forward to 2018. Maybe I'll do a video about my most anticipated. Actually, I think I will very shortly. And January is kind of a write-off in terms of films. Like, it's more there to catch up on the things you missed in December than actually worthwhile in terms of new releases. I mean, I'm not gonna go see like The Fucking Commuter or Insidious number 40 or whatever, so I don't really know when the next like full-on film review will be. So yeah, I'm gonna try and do as much of these as I can in the next like coming weeks. It's gonna be maybe a little difficult in terms of like my work and study schedule, but as the year goes, I want to be doing this a lot more and making like longer form analytical videos about films that I love. I've already got some like written down. But until then, thanks for watching, and see you soon.